So hello, welcome back to the F. I've got the head off as per the last episode, so now I'm going to inspect the head. I'm also going to try and put the head back on and a new cam belt on it as well. I'm still having a world of problems trying to get that engine mount off. I've used an impact gun and all sorts of wrenches and extension bars, but I've had no luck. So I'm going to have to find a way around that. But for now, I'm going to find out if the head is warped. So what I'm going to do is take a flat edge like this. This is a nice solid piece of metal, which is really straight. I've got a feeler gauge, which is what you'd use to check the gap on spark plugs or otherwise, and I'm just going to check by putting the bar on the face of the head to the block or to the gasket, if there's any gaps underneath the bar which would suggest it is warped. So okay, that's pretty good. Yeah, not too bad. Looks good to me. Okay, so I have no concerns that the head is warped at all. Before I do move on, actually, just to say, if it was warped, and so there was a bit of twist in the head, which might have been caused from overheating, and so the head's getting too hot and the metal expands and twists, you can get the head skimmed, which is when a very thin amount of metal is taken off the top, or in this case the bottom of the head, to basically level out the surface of the head to the gasket, to the block, to ensure a good seal. But luckily for me, I don't need to do that, so let's crack on. So in the last episode, you may remember I had a lot of trouble undoing those two bolts to be able to separate the engine mount and slip the cam belt out. So I made the bold decision to cut the cam belt and worry about the engine mount later. Well, the reason why this episode is so much later is because of that engine mount. I couldn't undo those two bolts. These two bolts, as you can see, I've taken the whole assembly off now, which I'll talk through in a second. These two bolts here, no matter how hard I tried, I huffed and I puffed and I used an impact gun. I also used a 2-meter scaffolding pole on the end of a breaker bar, and I had a friend help, and we had no luck at all. So we gave up on that route and tried to undo everything else that the engine mount bolted to be able to take it out. But that wasn't easy either. So actually, first thing I'll mention is I took the alternator off first, so bolt off at the top, which is what it hinges on. Then you've got this bolt nut here, which is how you adjust the tension when you put the belt back on. I couldn't quite get to that, so I just took it off where it mounts to the actual block, but it's easy still. But the alternator is seized, which is probably why when I started the engine, the belt snapped. So I either need to see if I can free that off robustly or get a new alternator. So that's something I'll play around with shortly. So this is the whole assembly for the engine mount. This big piece of aluminium here mounts onto the subframe. You've got your isolation mount here, and there's a bush here as well, which acts, I guess, a bit like a torque reaction mount. So it hinges a bit. And then this section here bolts into the block, and then this is sort of the two bolts that hold the mount to the block. So what I tried to do is I tried to undo, as you can see, there's 4 holes that go into the block, undo those bolts. But there is a bolt in the back, it's this one here, that goes into the rubber mount, so you couldn't get access to it because there's no space for it to come out before it hit the rubber mount. I then undid this here, which separates that section there to the big bracket. Then there was also these 2 bolts here that hold the rubber isolation mount onto the big bracket. This stupid hoop that I can't comprehend what it does, but it got in the way and meant it was very hard to get the bolts out. I got one out, but I couldn't get this one out here because it was just really seized. So then I tried to take out the two bolts at both ends to holds it onto the subframe, so I could just about get them out, which is good. That then loosened this whole assembly from the subframe, but I still needed to separate it from the block, and that bolt was obscured. So by taking off the nut here that holds the rubber mount, sort of the stud in the rubber mount, which actually ended up sacrificing it, but so I'm going to replace this rubber mount anyway, meant that was separated. I could pull this away and then just get to that final bolt there. That meant it's separated from the block and I could pull the whole thing out as an assembly. Then once that was done, I could separate this like that. Then I could finally get to that bolt that was really hard to remove. Get this stupid bracket out of the way. If anyone knows what this bracket does, then please tell me. I have no idea. I guess maybe it's a brace across the mount. There's the rubber elastomer isolation mount. As you can see, the studs just sheared off inside it and it's all come apart, but it needs to be done anyway. And this is looking a bit worse for wear. There's quite a bit of aluminium corrosion, oxidization underneath where the mount sits. I'll clean it up. If it doesn't provide a good mating surface, then I will replace this as well. But that was an absolute nightmare. Yeah, absolute nightmare of a job, but it's done now, and you know it's going to be a bit of a nightmare putting it back together without being able to separate those two bolts. So I am going to replace this with something that I can actually undo. I might grind through this, sacrifice it, and then hopefully be able to pull out the threads and keep this section. But either way, I'll replace whatever causes me a problem, because that engine mount needs to be, you know, torqued to the proper figures and assembled right in a good way. So that's what I'm going to do. So as you can probably see, the exhaust has been removed. So I haven't recorded how I did it because I just used an angle grinder and cut it all off. The bolts were all very rusted. The silencer, the hangers were very rusty. The tailpipe had rusted off, like I mentioned in the last episode. So sacrificed the silencer, and then while I was playing around with it, downpipe also snapped. So that was also scrap. So the only thing I've really actually been able to save is the exhaust manifold, which I removed from the head in the last episode, and then just separated it from the snapped downpipe. I was able to pull this off the car and then separate it from the downpipe. There's a gasket here that I need to replace, and then also, thankfully, the catalytic converter. So this is the emission control device in the exhaust. You can see inside the actual brick or substrate, as it's called. That's looking pretty good to me. There's no damage to that at all. Yeah, which is great. So that's a nice expensive component that I can save. So I need a new silencer and I need a new downpipe, because the engine's in the back. You know, all those components are actually quite short. There's a very small distance between the engine and the back of the car. But yeah, a bit of a nightmare. It's also a bit rusty under the body. So I'm going to tidy that up in a future episode, clean it off, put a bit of paint. Can't quite see it, so as long as the bodywork's protected, it should be good.
Alright, so it's time to do some jobs on the MG. I've neglected it for a little bit, but now I need to really crack on. So while the head is off, while the cam belt's off, I'm going to replace the water pump, which is this bit here. So the cam belt drives this pulley, and then that rotates the impeller behind, which pumps the coolant around the engine and the cooling system. So this is a cam belt driven one, so it's always good to change the water pump when you come to change the cam belt, because you know, if the water pump goes wrong separately later because you haven't replaced it, then you're gonna have to replace the whole cam belt, and it also might cause some damage with the timing and to the belt itself. So it's always good to replace the water pump when you change the cam belt. So it looks relatively easy to fit. There's some 8mm bolts holding it in around the side, and then there's also this thing here which I've already loosened off. I can't quite remember what that's for. I think it might be part of the tensioner. I'll find out later, but it was already hand loose, so I've just pulled that out, but it goes through the housing of the water pump. So I'm just going to quickly whip off those 8mm bolts that I mentioned. Lots of access now that engine mount assembly is off, so great time to change the water pump. Just the water pump there. So quite an easy to get through either from the top or from the wheel arch, and there's two 8mm bolts on the side that I need to get to. Nearly there, I hope anyway. This is some secret bolt, which there normally is. Oh, there she goes. There she goes. Okay, so there's a bit of gasket sealant on there, which I should put on when I put the new one on. There's no notable wear in the pulley, in the pump itself at all. No reason to replace it, but it's a good thing to do. But yeah, I just had to give it a bit of a knock because it sits on a locating dowel, just to separate it and break that gasket seal. Cool. Okay, so you may notice that I'm dressed differently, and that's because I didn't fit the pump yesterday because I wanted to get some gasket sealant just to make sure I have a really good seal on the water pump. So that was something I needed. So there's like a little seal here that sits in a groove. It goes around that way, and then I'm just going to put a little bit of gasket sealant in the groove, then just in some of the on the outside surface, mating surface, just so that it provides like a secondary barrier. Okay, let's pop that in there. Okay. Bolt. So there's a locating pin. Or there's two locating pins rather. Possibly there and there. There we go, that's really helpful. So I'm not going to torque up these bolts. They're pretty small, and which means they won't need much torque, and I won't have a torque wrench which goes down to whatever torque these need. So I'm just going to tighten up to a reasonable tightness. Okay, job's a good one. Okay, so I'm going to now change the VVC belt. I've bought some very nice, genuine Rover parts, apparently. So there isn't any sort of tension on this, so what I need to do is remove one of the pulleys. I'm going to remove this exhaust one here because it's a dumb pulley. It doesn't have all the trickery in it that the inlet one does. And but one thing I do need to do is I need to rotate the camshaft to make sure it's in the right position. The reason for that is because I had to rotate this camshaft to clear a head bolt, which I went through in one of my last videos. So the inlet camshaft is split in two, which meant that when I rotated this to clear this head bolt here, which was the one that was obscured by this little nodule, which I think is for a sensor to pick up on, this one here, that rotated the exhaust camshaft but didn't rotate this half here. So this is still in the right position, but I need to rotate this so it's in the right relative position. It shouldn't matter too much because these two pulleys just need to remain the same, but I'm going to do it anyway because I know where everything is. So I'm going to rotate that until I've just placed these pulleys back on, until I get this marking here, point to this one, and then I know everything's in the right place. Right. Okay, so what I've done is I've put the camshaft sprockets back on and locked them so that I can loosen off this bolt here inside this pulley to allow me to take the belt off. I hope that's right. I'm a bit concerned because some of the valves look open. So before I do anything, I'm just going to make sure I mark absolutely everything up. There are two gouges here and here that point to each other, which is a good sign. I'm also going to just, there's also a gouge there, but I'm just going to put that one there. So this has already been done before. So there's a marker there and a marker there that I've just put paint on, so they point together. There's also a marker at the top here, which also lines up to this paint that's already been put on the on there before. Again, there's already paint that's been put on here, and that lines to here. So if I do take it off and it does move, at least I can find where to put it back to, assuming nothing funky goes on in there. So there's only one way to find out. 17 mil. Feel great. Oh, it looks like it's loosening to me. Persuader. Oh, thank Christ. Okay. Sorry, thank my mum. Okay. This off. Okay, so rightly or wrongly, I haven't actually taken that pulley off, because by loosening off the sprocket, it's given it enough wiggle room to actually allow it to come off, but I'm not sure if it's going to give me that same pulse. So that's just spun. It's all moved. Everything's moved. Everything's moved. Yeah. Okay, so everything's lined up. Thank you for my, well, the markings are already there, my markings, and then I'm hoping, oops, sorry, they're the wrong ones. That needs to be in the centre. So that position there is holding it with the valves open. It's making it pretty tricky to do. So yesterday I took the VVC belt off, thinking I'd done the right thing, and I can't get it back on because when I try and then reline up the markings, which is what I use to take the belt off, the sprocket, as it gets near it, sort of skips because of the mechanism inside the pulley. So it's about there, and there you go, it skips around to, well, you know, 45 degrees, and I can't hold it there. So I'm going to have to think of doing something different, and that different thing I'm going to do is point the markers outwards. So God, that's somehow very lucky. So if you hopefully see those two markings there, they appear to line up, and they should line up for the plastic groove in the centre. So I reckon that's bang on, you know. I don't even think that's tooth out. So that's worked out very well, but I had to make a bit of a guess because I couldn't get it to stay even perfectly horizontal. So yeah, I've made a bit of a stab, and it seems to work. So I'm just gonna probably torque that up. I'll check the torque value of it and torque it up, but that is the belt done. So I mentioned the alternator was seized, and I've just had a go, despite doing something on the Citroen and getting very distracted, on trying to unseize it. I did try and loosen it off with a breaker bar, but it was actually rotating the pulley, so it wasn't fully seized, but it also meant I couldn't get this nut off without trying to hold it in place, but it was hard because it sinks into the pulley like that. So I used an impact gun to get that off, which is great. Got the pulley off, and now I've exposed the bearing, and it was actually seized. I put a bit of WD-40 on it, and I just got an impact. Then I got an impact gun on it, and I just freed it off, and as you can see now, it spins. Actually, I can do it with my fingers. It spins really freely, so I will just clean up the alternator with a garage sock. And it is full of grass and whatnot, but at least that's not the windings unravelling. So I think I will use this alternator. I'll fit it to the car. I'm not particularly worried about it, and if it doesn't function as it should do, then I'll replace it. But I think for the good of the planet and my bank balance, we will try and give it a go. I think I'll leave it there for this episode. I haven't done a massive amount. I've changed the VVC belt, I've removed the alternator, removed the exhaust system, and I've fitted the water pump and freed off the alternator. But I am waiting on some parts, such as a head gasket kit to arrive and a new engine mount, so it'd be good to get this episode out there while I'm waiting on those parts, and it has taken me a long time to get this episode out because of that bloody engine mount. So, yeah, apologies for the bad footage. I haven't really recorded all the things that took me a long time to do, such as the exhaust and the engine mount, but yeah, if you have any questions, then please feel free to get in touch, and hopefully I'll get a better video out sooner of the head going back on, and then I'll probably contemplate doing the clutch next. So stay tuned, and thank you for watching.